My daughter stole my home after my wife's funeral, but my old military dog uncovered the one secret that destroyed everything. The night my daughter locked me out in the freezing Montana rain, I believed I had lost my family, my home, and every reason to keep fighting. But my retired military K9 refused to leave that forgotten farm. What he found beneath the old barn revealed a truth my late wife had hidden for years, and turned the greatest betrayal of my life into the beginning of justice. Comment 1 if you'd keep fighting, or 0 if you think you'd walk away, and tell me what state or country you're watching from. Cold November rain drifted across the quiet hills outside Flathead Lake, Montana, soft enough to seem gentle from a distance, yet relentless enough to soak through every black coat gathered around the little white church. Gray clouds hung low over the pine-covered mountains, swallowing the peaks that Eleanor Sullivan had loved to paint during the final years of her life. Jack Sullivan stood perfectly still beside the fresh grave. At 72, the retired Navy SEAL looked like weathered granite. His shoulders remained broad despite the years, but they carried a weight no military rucksack ever could. Deep lines crossed his face, each one earned through combat deployments, sleepless nights, and now unbearable loss. Beside him sat Atlas, the retired military K9, a Belgian Malinois with a silvering muzzle and alert amber eyes, never took his gaze off Jack. His service harness had long been retired, but the discipline remained. Every few seconds, Atlas gently leaned his shoulder against Jack's leg, as though silently reminding him that he wasn't standing alone. The minister finished the final prayer. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Jack barely heard the words. His attention had drifted to the flag folded with military precision in his trembling hands. Not because Eleanor had served, because she had stood behind every mission he survived, every deployment, every nightmare, every homecoming. She had been the steady harbor waiting beyond every storm. Now the harbor was gone. The mourners slowly dispersed beneath umbrellas, offering quiet condolences before disappearing toward their vehicles. Some embraced Jack. Others simply nodded, understanding there were no words capable of reaching a man whose entire world had just been lowered into the earth. Atlas remained beside him. The dog looked once toward the grave, then back at Jack. Years ago, during a mountain operation overseas, Atlas had pulled Jack from beneath a collapsed stone wall after an explosion buried them both. Jack often joked that the dog had saved his life twice, the first time from enemy fire, the second from himself. Ever since retiring, the nightmares came without warning. Sometimes Jack woke believing he was still trapped beneath concrete, unable to breathe. Sometimes he reached for a rifle that no longer existed. Each time, Atlas quietly climbed beside the bed until Jack's heartbeat slowed. No commands, no barking, just loyalty. Today, however, even Atlas seemed unsettled. As they walked toward the black pickup waiting outside the church, the dog repeatedly glanced back toward the cemetery, ears twitching as though sensing a danger no human could detect. Jack rested one hand on Atlas's neck. "Come on, partner." His voice cracked. "We've still got one more thing to do." The law office overlooked the lake from a polished stone building where expensive boats floated quietly below. Inside, warmth filled the conference room. A fire burned behind glass. Fresh coffee sat untouched on a mahogany table. Attorney Nathan Cole adjusted his glasses before opening Eleanor Sullivan's final will. Nathan had been their family lawyer for nearly 30 years. His usually calm expression carried visible sadness. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said softly. Eleanor prepared these documents several months ago while she was still capable of making independent decisions. Across the table sat Lauren Sullivan, Jack's only child. Her eyes were red. Whether from genuine grief or exhaustion, Jack couldn't tell. Beside her sat her husband, Evan Brooks, impeccably dressed, perfect posture, perfect smile. The successful real estate developer looked every bit the polished businessman featured on magazine covers. Jack had never entirely trusted him, but Eleanor had always encouraged peace within the family. So Jack kept his doubts to himself. Nathan began reading. The first several pages covered charitable donations, artwork, family keepsakes, and personal belongings. Then came the estate, the lakeside residence located on Flathead Lake. Nathan paused briefly. Shall pass to Lauren Sullivan. Lauren quietly wiped away a tear. Jack smiled faintly. It made sense. The house was enormous. Too much for one old man. Nathan continued. Associated investment properties jointly attached to the residence shall also transfer to Lauren Sullivan. Jack nodded again. Still reasonable. Then Nathan reached the final section, the mountain property located near Glacier National Park, including all attached acreage. Jack assumed Nathan was about to read Lauren's name again. Instead, shall become the sole property of my husband, Jack Sullivan. Silence settled across the room. Jack blinked. The old ranch? He asked. Nathan looked up. Yes. Jack frowned. The abandoned place? Nathan simply nodded. Jack remembered buying that forgotten property decades earlier because Eleanor loved the mountain view. They visited only a handful of times before life became too busy. No electricity, broken fencing, collapsed barns. Most people called it worthless. Lauren leaned forward, gently placing a hand over her father's rough, calloused fingers. Dad, her voice sounded warm. Caring for this house by yourself would be impossible. Jack looked toward her. The stairs, she continued. The maintenance, the winters. Mom worried about you. Evan added a sympathetic smile. The ranch is peaceful, quiet, surrounded by nature. Honestly, Jack, it'll probably be exactly what you need. Nathan closed the folder. The meeting ended. Everything happened so quickly afterward that Jack barely remembered leaving the office. He was still carrying Eleanor's folded scarf, still expecting to hear her voice somewhere nearby, still believing home meant the lakeside mansion where 43 years of memories waited. Darkness settled early over Montana. Rain began falling again. Atlas sat quietly in the passenger seat while Jack stared through the windshield at the familiar stone driveway. Warm lights glowed from every window of the mansion. It looked exactly as it always had. Safe. Welcoming. Home. Jack stepped onto the porch carrying only a small duffel bag. He never reached the front door. Lauren opened it before he could knock. She didn't invite him inside. Behind her, movers were already carrying furniture across the polished hardwood floor. Workers measured walls. Others discussed renovations. Everything felt immediate, permanent. Lauren folded her arms. Dad? Jack smiled weakly. I figured I'd stay in my old room tonight. Silence. Rain dripped steadily from the porch roof. Lauren looked past him rather than into his eyes. I don't think that's a good idea. Jack frowned. What do you mean? Evan appeared beside her, still smiling, always smiling. We've already started making changes. Jack looked beyond them toward Eleanor's favorite piano. It had disappeared. The family photographs were gone. Even the antique clock Eleanor wound every Sunday had vanished. His heartbeat slowed into something heavy. Where are our things? Lauren sighed impatiently. We're reorganizing. Our things, Jack repeated quietly. The house needs to move forward. Jack stared at her for just a second. He didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him. Then she spoke again. This house belongs to me now. The words landed harder than any explosion Jack had survived. You have the ranch. I thought... His voice barely existed. I thought we'd still... Lauren shook her head. You'll be happier there. Rain soaked Jack's jacket. I just buried your mother. Her expression remained strangely distant. You need to leave tonight. Jack looked at Evan. Surely he would intervene. Instead, Evan reached beside the doorway and placed a small ring of rusty keys into Jack's hand. These are for the farm. Jack stared at them. Cold metal. Years of rust. No warmth. No welcome. Only exile. I don't understand. You will, Evan replied calmly. It'll be better for everyone. Jack swallowed hard. Lauren. She finally looked directly at him. I'm asking you to go, not pleading, not crying, simply asking him to disappear. For several endless seconds, no one moved. The only sound came from rain striking the stone steps. Jack slowly bent down and picked up his duffel bag. 43 years, reduced to one bag. As he turned away, Atlas stood. The dog did not follow immediately. Instead, he faced Lauren. His ears rose. Every muscle tightened. A deep, unmistakable growl rolled from his chest. Not loud, not aggressive. A warning. The same warning Jack had heard only once before. Moments before, enemy fire erupted during a mission overseas. Lauren frowned. Control your dog. Jack gently rested a hand on Atlas's shoulder. It's okay, partner. But Atlas didn't move. His amber eyes remained fixed on Lauren, watching, studying, as though somewhere beneath the expensive clothes and carefully composed expression, he had detected something profoundly wrong, something no human had noticed. Only after several long seconds did Atlas reluctantly turn away. Together, the old soldier and his loyal K9 disappeared into the cold Montana rain, leaving the mansion behind. Neither of them noticed Lauren quietly close the door. But Atlas looked back one final time, not at the house, at Lauren herself, and for reasons Jack could not yet understand. The dog refused to break eye contact. Atlas stood frozen in the rain, his amber eyes locked on Lauren as if he were memorizing something hidden beneath her calm expression. His ears remained forward, his breathing slow and controlled. Jack had learned long ago that Atlas never reacted without reason. During their years serving together, the dog had sensed ambushes before a single shot was fired, detected hidden explosives buried beneath dirt roads, and once refused to enter a building moments before it collapsed under enemy mortar fire. Tonight felt strangely familiar. Come on, buddy, Jack whispered. Atlas finally lowered his head, though he looked back one last time before following his partner down the stone driveway. Behind them, the massive wooden doors of the mansion closed with a dull, echoing thud. The sound lingered in Jack's ears. It felt less like a door closing and more like an entire lifetime ending. The rain intensified as Jack loaded his worn duffel bag into the aging blue pickup truck that had survived nearly 300,000 miles. The truck had carried lumber, camping gear, rescue dogs, and grandchildren once upon a time. Now it carried only an old soldier and the last friend he truly trusted. Atlas climbed into the passenger seat without command. Jack turned the ignition. The engine hesitated before rumbling to life. For several moments, neither of them moved. Jack rested both hands on the steering wheel. The windshield blurred beneath steady rain. He could still see Eleanor standing in the kitchen window every morning with a cup of coffee in her hands, waving as he left for work. He blinked. The image disappeared. Only darkness remained. Home, he murmured. I don't even know where that is anymore. Atlas quietly placed one paw on Jack's arm. The familiar touch steadied him. Jack managed a tired smile. "You've always known when I needed that." The truck slowly rolled down the long driveway and disappeared into the winding mountain highway leading north. The road climbed through towering forests of lodgepole pine dusted with early snow. Headlights cut narrow tunnels through drifting mist. Jack drove mostly in silence. The radio remained off. Silence had become easier than conversation after Eleanor's illness. Every few miles, Atlas lifted his nose toward the cracked passenger window, breathing in the scents carried through the cold Montana air. Pine, wet earth, snow, wildlife. Everything normal, everything peaceful. Yet Jack couldn't shake the uneasy feeling growing inside him. The image of Lauren's expression replayed endlessly. There had been no anger, no guilt, no sadness, only distance, as though someone had quietly erased the daughter he had raised. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Without warning, a flash. Not outside. Inside his mind. Dust. Gunfire. The deafening roar of helicopters. Jack instinctively slammed the brakes. The truck skidded sideways before stopping inches from a snow-covered guardrail overlooking a steep ravine. His breathing became rapid. His vision narrowed. He wasn't on a Montana highway anymore. He was back overseas. The smell of burning fuel filled his senses. Someone was screaming over the radio. Another explosion. Jack reached desperately beneath his seat for a rifle that wasn't there. Atlas reacted instantly. The dog climbed halfway across the center console and pressed his full weight against Jack's chest. His rough tongue brushed Jack's shaking hand. One slow breath, then another. Jack squeezed his eyes shut. The helicopter vanished. The explosions faded. Cold mountain air replaced burning desert wind. "I'm here," Jack whispered to himself. "I'm home." Atlas remained pressed against him until his heartbeat slowed. After nearly 5 minutes, Jack leaned forward and rested his forehead against the steering wheel. "I would have never made it this far without you." Atlas answered with a gentle nudge beneath Jack's chin. The old soldier laughed softly through tears. "You still think you're the one in charge." If the dog could smile, he seemed to. An hour later, the fuel gauge dropped dangerously close to empty. A flickering neon sign appeared ahead beside the highway. Moose Creek Diner open 24 hours. The small roadside diner looked like something untouched since the 1970s. Warm yellow light spilled through fogged windows. A faded American flag hung motionless beneath the porch roof. Jack parked beside 2 pickup trucks and 1 snow-covered logging rig. Atlas jumped down beside him. The warmth inside wrapped around them immediately. Coffee, fresh pie, wood smoke. Country music played softly from an old jukebox. Several truck drivers nodded politely as Jack entered. A gray-haired waitress smiled kindly. "You boys look frozen." Jack returned the smile. "Feels that way." She filled a mug with steaming coffee before he even asked. Atlas settled quietly beneath the booth, exactly as military working dogs were trained to do. The waitress noticed. "Beautiful dog. He saved my life more than once." She bent slightly to scratch Atlas behind one ear. The old Malinois accepted the attention for exactly 3 seconds before returning his attention to Jack. Always working, even retired. Jack ordered a bowl of beef stew and an extra plate of grilled chicken for Atlas. For the first time since Eleanor's funeral, he almost felt human again. The waitress returned carrying the check. "No rush, sweetheart." Jack reached into his wallet. His premium bank card slid easily into the payment machine. Processing. Processing. Declined. He frowned. Must have been the chip. The waitress smiled politely. "It happens." Jack tried again. Declined. He pulled out another card, then another. Same result. The waitress looked uncomfortable. Maybe your bank's having system trouble. Jack forced a smile. I'll call them. He stepped outside into the freezing night. Atlas followed immediately. Jack dialed customer service. After several automated prompts, a representative finally answered. Thank you for calling Mountain Federal Bank. My cards are being declined. The representative verified his information. Silence followed. Then, Mr. Sullivan. Yes? It appears your primary accounts were closed earlier today. Jack frowned. Closed? There were authorized transfers executed this afternoon. I never authorized anything. Another pause. I'm sorry, sir, but according to our records, legal documentation was submitted granting financial authority. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. What documentation? I'm unable to discuss that over the phone. My retirement account? Silence. Then quietly. The balance is currently unavailable. Jack stared into the darkness. My savings? The same status. My pension. I'm very sorry, Mr. Sullivan. The line suddenly felt impossibly quiet. Everything. Gone. 40 years. Military service. Construction contracts. Retirement. Every overtime shift. Every sacrifice. Vanished. He slowly lowered the phone. Atlas stepped closer until his shoulder touched Jack's leg. Jack looked down at him. They took everything. His voice barely existed. They didn't just take the house. He looked toward the dark highway stretching endlessly through the mountains. They took our future. The waitress quietly approached, holding 2 paper bags. You forgot your dinner. Jack hesitated. I don't think I can pay. She looked at Atlas, then back at Jack. My husband served in Vietnam. She gently placed the bags into Jack's hands. Tonight's on the house. Jack swallowed hard. I can't. You already did. She smiled warmly. By coming home. For several seconds, he couldn't speak. Finally, he managed. Thank you. As Jack and Atlas walked back toward the truck, Atlas suddenly stopped. Every muscle stiffened. His ears snapped forward. A low growl escaped his throat. Not toward the diner, not toward the highway, toward the dense black forest beyond the gas pumps. Jack followed his gaze. Nothing moved. Only towering pines swaying gently beneath moonlight. Then Atlas barked once, sharp, focused. His eyes never left the darkness between the trees. Jack narrowed his own eyes. Years of SEAL training whispered the same warning Atlas seemed to feel. Someone, or something, was out there watching them. Jack stood perfectly still beside the pickup, the paper bag of food hanging loosely from one hand. Atlas had not moved. The retired military K9 remained fixed on the wall of black pine trees beyond the old gas station. His posture was rigid, ears forward, nose lifted into the freezing mountain air. Every instinct Jack had trusted through years of combat told him never to ignore that stance. The wind whispered through the branches. Snowflakes drifted lazily between the trunks. Nothing appeared. After nearly a full minute, Atlas slowly relaxed, though his eyes never completely left the forest. Jack rested a hand on the dog's neck. What did you smell, partner? Atlas gave no answer beyond a quiet huff through his nose. Jack had learned long ago that not every warning revealed itself immediately. Sometimes danger simply wanted to know where you were going. The highway narrowed as dawn slowly approached. Snow-covered peaks emerged from the darkness like silent giants standing watch over western Montana. The first rays of sunlight painted the mountains in pale gold, while frozen rivers wound through endless forests below. The farther Jack drove from civilization, the fewer signs of life remained. Gas stations disappeared. Cell service faded. The road became cracked asphalt bordered by towering pines and abandoned logging trails. Atlas finally rested his head on the truck's dashboard, though one ear remained alert. Jack smiled faintly. "You never really sleep, do you?" The dog opened one eye. "Not really." Just after sunrise, a weathered wooden sign appeared beside a gravel road. Dead Ridge Road. No winter maintenance. Another mile farther, a second sign leaned crookedly beneath years of snow and rain. Sullivan Ranch. Jack slowed the truck. The gravel driveway stretched almost half a mile toward the mountains, disappearing beneath overgrown weeds and neglected pine branches. He remembered buying this land 35 years earlier. Back then, Eleanor had fallen in love with the mountain view. "We'll retire here someday," she had said. Life had gotten in the way. Military deployments, business, raising Lauren, hospital visits. The dream had quietly slipped away. Now, it was all he had left. The truck rolled to a stop before an old ranch house whose faded white paint had almost disappeared beneath decades of harsh Montana winters. One shutter hung crooked. Several porch boards had collapsed. The roof sagged noticeably in the middle. A rusty windmill creaked somewhere behind the house. Jack climbed out slowly. Cold air filled his lungs. Silence surrounded everything. Not the peaceful silence of home, the lonely silence of abandonment. Atlas jumped down beside him. Instead of approaching the porch, the dog immediately began scanning the property. His nose moved constantly. He circled the yard once, then twice, ignoring the farmhouse entirely. Jack looked around. Broken fencing disappeared into the forest. An old livestock corral leaned sideways. A collapsed equipment shed rested beneath heavy snow. Farther uphill stood an enormous weather-beaten barn. Atlas stopped, his eyes fixed on it. Jack noticed. "You don't like the house?" Atlas didn't even glance toward the porch. Instead, he started walking directly toward the barn. The heavy wooden doors groaned as Jack pushed them open. Dust floated through narrow beams of morning sunlight. Empty stalls lined both sides of the building. Broken harnesses still hung from old hooks. Birds scattered into the rafters. Everything smelled of damp wood, old hay, and forgotten years. Atlas slowly walked every inch of the barn floor. He sniffed support beams, corners, old machinery, then quietly walked back outside. Jack frowned. "Nothing?" Atlas continued toward the farmhouse, but instead of entering, he simply sat on the porch, waiting. Jack opened the front door. The stale air inside carried the scent of dust and pine. Furniture sat beneath white sheets. A stone fireplace dominated the living room. An old rocking chair rested beside the window. Everything looked frozen in time. Jack slowly removed the sheet covering the chair. He smiled sadly. "I remember this." Eleanor had spent hours there reading while snow fell outside. He could almost hear her laughter echoing through the empty room. His chest tightened. Grief returned without warning. Atlas quietly walked inside. For a moment, Jack expected the dog to settle beside the fireplace. Instead, Atlas turned around, walked back outside, and returned to the barn. Again. By late afternoon, Jack had unpacked the few belongings he still possessed. A change of clothes, military photographs, Eleanor's scarf, a framed picture of Lauren at age 10, smiling beside Atlas shortly after the dog retired from military service. Jack stared at the photograph. Back then, Lauren adored Atlas. She used to sneak him pieces of bacon beneath the breakfast table. She called him Captain. The memory felt like it belonged to someone else's family. A cold breeze drifted through a cracked window. Jack sighed. So what happened? The empty room offered no answer. Near sunset, the distant rumble of an engine echoed across the valley. An old green pickup slowly bounced down the driveway. A silver-haired woman climbed out carrying a covered casserole dish. She looked to be in her late 70s, wearing worn boots and a thick flannel jacket. She smiled warmly. "You must be Jack." Jack nodded. "I am." She extended her hand. "Grace Harper. We own the ranch about 3 miles down the valley." Jack shook her hand. "Nice to meet you. I figured you'd need something hot to eat." She lifted the casserole. "No one should spend their first night alone out here." Jack thanked her and invited her inside. Grace looked around the farmhouse without judgment. "It still leaks?" Jack laughed quietly. "I haven't found all the leaks yet." "You will." She smiled. "They always introduce themselves during the first snowstorm." Atlas approached cautiously. Grace knelt slowly. "So you're Atlas?" The dog sniffed her offered hand. After a moment, his tail wagged once. Grace smiled wider. "I've heard about you." Jack looked surprised. "You have? Your wife talked about him every time she came." Jack froze. "Eleanor came here?" Grace nodded casually. "Oh, dozens of times." Jack stared. "When?" "The last 5 years, mostly." His confusion deepened. "I never knew." Grace looked equally surprised. "You didn't?" Jack slowly shook his head. "No." Grace frowned thoughtfully. "Well, she always came alone. Sometimes she'd stay all afternoon. Other times she'd leave before dark." Jack searched his memory. Business trips. Medical appointments. Days. Eleanor said she had errands in town. None of it had seemed unusual then. "What did she do here?" Grace smiled apologetically. "I honestly couldn't tell you." She never said. Just smiled. Always carried folders. Sometimes measuring equipment. Couple times I saw contractors. Jack's pulse quickened. "Contractors?" Grace nodded. "I assumed you two were finally fixing the place up." Jack slowly looked toward the barn visible through the kitchen window. Atlas was already standing on the porch, staring in exactly the same direction. Grace followed his gaze. "Funny thing." Jack looked back. "What's funny?" "That dog." She chuckled softly. "Every single time your wife visited, he'd spend hours walking around that old barn." Jack felt something shift inside him. "What do you mean?" Grace shrugged. "I figured he was chasing mice. But he always returned to the exact same spot." Neither of them spoke. Outside. Atlas suddenly trotted off the porch, crossed the snowy yard, walked straight into the weather-beaten barn. Jack stood. "So did Eleanor ever tell you why she kept coming?" Grace gently shook her head. "Only one thing." "What was that?" The old woman smiled. She said, "Someday Jack will understand." Those words lingered in the quiet kitchen long after Grace drove away. Night settled quickly over Dead Ridge. Jack carried a lantern across the snow toward the barn. Atlas was already waiting inside. The old Malinois didn't greet him, didn't bark, didn't move. He simply stood over one section of the weathered wooden floor, watching, waiting. Then, with quiet determination, Atlas lifted one paw and began scratching the exact same floorboard. Once, twice, again, again, again. He wasn't searching randomly. He knew precisely where he wanted Jack to look. Atlas scratched the same weathered floorboard again, then stepped back and fixed his amber eyes on Jack. His breathing remained calm, but every line of his body carried quiet urgency. Jack raised the lantern, letting its warm glow spread across the old barn. Dust drifted lazily through the light. The wind sighed through gaps in the warped walls, carrying the scent of pine and snow into the silent building. For several moments, neither man nor dog moved. Jack had learned one lesson during 24 years as a Navy SEAL that never failed him. When your partner tells you something is wrong, you listen, even if you don't yet understand why. He crouched beside Atlas and brushed away years of dirt with his gloved hand. The floorboards looked no different from the rest. Gray, weathered, splintered by countless Montana winters. Yet Atlas lowered his nose again and tapped the exact same spot with one paw. Once, twice. Then he looked back at Jack. "All right," Jack murmured. "Let's see what you've found." The old barn held little worth. A broken shovel leaned against one wall. An axe with a cracked handle rested beneath a window. Jack chose the shovel. Its blade protested with a rusty squeal as he forced it beneath the floorboard. Nothing. He tried again. The wood refused to move. Jack frowned. It wasn't nailed down the way old ranch flooring normally was. It felt anchored. Purposefully, he set the shovel aside and examined the seams more closely. Years of constructing military outposts and later supervising commercial building projects had trained his eyes to notice patterns. The surrounding boards had aged naturally. One section hadn't. Someone had stained newer lumber to resemble old wood, a deliberate disguise. Jack slowly smiled for the first time in days. "Well, Eleanor, what were you doing?" Atlas's tail thumped the floor once. Jack returned to the truck and retrieved a heavy pry bar from the toolbox behind the cab. Snow had begun falling harder. The mountains surrounding the ranch faded into a curtain of white. Inside the barn, the lantern cast long shadows across the floor. Jack wedged the steel bar beneath the suspicious boards. He leaned his weight against it. Nothing. He shifted position, applied more pressure. A sharp crack echoed through the barn. One plank finally lifted. Not because it had broken free, because hidden metal resisted beneath it. Jack carefully removed another board, then another. Atlas stepped closer. The lantern light reflected from something smooth beneath decades of dust. Steel. Not rusted. Not old. Industrial-grade steel. Jack slowly brushed away the remaining dirt. A perfectly fitted rectangular plate emerged beneath the wooden floor. No rancher would install something like this. It belonged inside a secure military facility, or a hardened government bunker. His pulse quickened. Eleanor. He whispered her name almost in disbelief. "What did you build?" Atlas suddenly turned toward the barn doors. His ears snapped upright. Jack instantly extinguished the lantern. Darkness swallowed the building. Snow muffled every sound outside. Then, headlights. Far down the valley. Two beams briefly swept across distant trees before disappearing behind another ridge. Jack remained perfectly still. Old instincts returned effortlessly. Observe. Listen. Wait. Atlas never barked. His silence told Jack almost as much as a warning would have. Whoever had passed wasn't approaching. Not tonight. After several long minutes, Jack relit the lantern. "We're alone." Atlas relaxed, but only slightly. The steel plate measured nearly 8 feet long. No visible handle. No hinges. No locking wheel. Jack examined every inch. His fingertips traced the edges until they stopped near one corner. There. barely noticeable beneath years of carefully packed dirt. A tiny recessed opening, almost invisible. He inserted the blade of his pocket knife. The hidden panel clicked open. Inside waited something entirely unexpected. A keypad. Its small display remained dark. Modern, weather-sealed, protected beneath layers of deliberate camouflage. Jack stared. This isn't 30 years old. Someone had installed it recently. Very recently. His mind raced. Grace had mentioned contractors, Eleanor's mysterious visits, folders, measurements. Atlas repeatedly inspecting this exact location. The pieces refused to fit together. Unless his wife hadn't been maintaining an abandoned ranch. She had been building something. Something nobody else was supposed to discover. Jack searched the barn for electrical lines. There were none. No power poles reached the property. No visible generators. Yet the keypad clearly belonged to an active security system. He pressed one button. Nothing happened. Then Atlas walked toward the rear wall. He stopped beside an old breaker box covered with cobwebs. Jack followed. The metal cabinet looked abandoned. He pulled the handle. Inside, everything gleamed. Brand new wiring. Fresh circuit breakers. Industrial batteries. A green indicator light blinked quietly. Power. Hidden in plain sight. Jack carefully switched the master breaker. Deep beneath the barn, something awakened. A faint vibration traveled upward through the concrete foundation. So subtle most people would never have noticed. Jack did. Atlas certainly did. The Malinois looked directly back toward the steel plate. A soft electronic hum rose somewhere below them. The keypad illuminated. Blue numbers glowed through the darkness. Jack stared in amazement. Someone had designed this entire system to remain invisible unless the correct sequence was followed. Only one question remained. Who knew the code? He entered Eleanor's birthday. A harsh beep. Red light. Denied. He tried their wedding anniversary. Another rejection. Atlas sat quietly beside him, watching every movement. Jack rubbed his tired face. Think, old man. Eleanor never forgot anything. If she wanted me to find this, she would have left me away. His thoughts drifted unexpectedly to the funeral, to Lauren, to the reading of the will, to the family that no longer existed. Then another memory surfaced. Eleanor laughing one summer afternoon while teaching neighborhood children how to unlock combination locks. The answer is always the thing your heart remembers first. Jack froze, his heart, not his mind, his heart. Without fully realizing why, he slowly entered the date that had changed both their lives forever. The day Atlas officially became part of their family after retiring from military service. The final digit clicked. Silence. Then, the keypad flashed green. A deep mechanical clunk echoed beneath the barn. Atlas stood immediately. Hydraulic locks disengaged somewhere below. Dust drifted from the rafters. The entire steel plate trembled. Jack instinctively stepped backward as hidden machinery came alive after years of silence. Slowly, almost silently, the massive steel hatch began sliding sideways beneath the barn floor. A rush of cool, filtered air rose from the darkness below. Not damp, not stale, climate-controlled. Bright white lights flickered on one after another, descending into the earth like a staircase disappearing into another world. Jack stared speechless. The abandoned ranch, the collapsing barn, the worthless inheritance, it had all been a disguise. Atlas calmly walked to the edge of the opening and looked down. Then he turned toward Jack, as if to say, "I've been trying to show you." Jack swallowed hard. His grief gave way to something entirely different. Wonder, confusion, hope. He lifted the lantern, took one slow breath, and placed his boot onto the first concrete step leading into the hidden depths beneath the mountain. Atlas stayed close, descending one careful step behind him. The heavy steel hatch remained open above them, framing a rectangle of pale winter daylight that grew smaller with every step downward. The cold wind from the barn slowly disappeared, replaced by cool, perfectly filtered air was carrying the faint scent of polished metal and cedar. Jack counted the stairs automatically. Military habit, 20, 30, 42. At the bottom, motion sensors quietly awakened. Soft white LED lights illuminated the corridor one section at a time, stretching ahead through reinforced concrete walls. Jack lowered the lantern. He no longer needed it. "This place has power," he whispered. And someone maintained it. Atlas walked several feet ahead, his nails clicking softly across the spotless concrete floor. Nothing about the underground corridor felt abandoned. No dust, no cobwebs, no moisture. The ventilation system hummed with quiet efficiency. Someone had built this place with extraordinary care. Jack reached out and rested his fingertips against the wall. Commercial-grade reinforced concrete, professionally poured, military-quality workmanship. Not something assembled by hobbyists. His heartbeat slowly quickened. How had Eleanor managed this? When? And why had she hidden it from him? The hallway opened into an enormous underground chamber. Jack stopped walking. His breath caught in his throat. The space was nearly the size of an aircraft hangar. Bright overhead lights reflected from polished epoxy floors, so clean they mirrored the ceiling above. Along one wall stood industrial storage cabinets labeled with meticulous precision. Medical, communications, emergency power, water systems. Another section contained shelves stacked with freeze-dried food, bottled water, generators, fuel cells, and neatly organized emergency equipment. Nothing appeared random. Everything had its place. It looked less like a bunker, and more like a command center waiting for someone to arrive. Atlas quietly circled the room. His nose worked constantly, but unlike the barn above, he wasn't searching anxiously. He behaved as though he had entered a familiar place. Jack frowned. "You've been here before." Atlas glanced back but continued forward. The realization struck Jack almost immediately. Of course. Whenever Eleanor told him she was spending the afternoon running errands, Atlas had often gone with her. He had assumed they visited the veterinarian or the lake. Instead, they had been coming here. At the center of the chamber stood 4 vehicles beneath fitted gray covers. Jack slowly approached the nearest one. He gripped the edge of the cover, pulled. The fabric slid gracefully onto the floor. A beautifully restored 1967 Shelby GT 500 gleamed beneath the lights, its deep midnight blue paint flawless enough to reflect Jack's astonished face. He slowly circled it. Every detail looked factory perfect. Chrome untouched, leather interior immaculate, not a speck of dust. He looked toward the other covered vehicles. One by one, he removed the protective covers. A classic Ford Bronco restored for mountain terrain, a vintage Chevrolet pickup, a beautifully preserved Willys Jeep, each one maintained to museum standards. Jack shook his head in disbelief. "Eleanor, you've been busy." He remembered years of mysterious conversations ending whenever he entered the room. Financial reports, phone calls, occasional contractors she insisted were just helping with investments. He had trusted her completely. Now he realized she'd been carrying an enormous secret entirely alone. Atlas wandered toward the far corner of the chamber. His pace slowed, his ears lifted. Jack followed. There stood a heavy oak desk positioned beneath a large topographic map of western Montana. The map displayed mountain ranges, rivers, logging roads, and property boundaries marked in careful red ink. Beside it rested several locked filing cabinets, a leather chair, a brass reading lamp. Everything arranged exactly as Eleanor would have preferred. Jack gently touched the chair. He could almost picture her sitting there late into the evening, reading documents beneath the warm glow of the lamp. A lump formed in his throat. For several long seconds, he simply stood there. Grief washed over him again. Not as violently as before. This time, it carried something else. Admiration. Whatever Eleanor had been building, she had built it to last. Atlas suddenly whined, not loudly, just enough to draw Jack's attention. The dog stood beside what appeared to be an ordinary section of wall. He sniffed once, twice, then pressed his nose against a narrow wooden cabinet. Jack opened it. Inside sat a biometric safe recessed into the concrete. Its matte black finish looked brand new. A small fingerprint scanner glowed softly blue. Jack sighed. Well, I guess this is where the trail ends. Eleanor's fingerprint would never touch the scanner again. He turned away. Atlas didn't. Instead, the old Malinois gently nudged Jack's right hand toward the scanner. Jack smiled sadly. She only programmed herself, buddy. Atlas nudged his hand again, more insistently. Jack hesitated, then slowly placed his thumb against the glass. A blue light swept across his fingerprint. 1 second. 2. A pleasant electronic tone echoed through the room. Access granted. Jack stared in disbelief as heavy internal bolts unlocked with a series of soft mechanical clicks. The safe door slowly opened. "Eleanor," he whispered. "You planned for me." Inside rested only 3 items. The first was a thick, cream-colored envelope. Across the front, written in Eleanor's graceful handwriting, were 6 simple words. For Jack, only when you're alone. The second item was a portable encrypted hard drive. The third, a worn leather journal tied with a blue ribbon. Atlas quietly sat beside Jack as though understanding the importance of the moment. Jack carefully picked up the envelope. His hands trembled. He broke the seal. The familiar scent of Eleanor's lavender stationery drifted softly into the air. He unfolded the first page. "My dearest Jack, if you're reading this, then my greatest fear has finally come true. I prayed every day that I would recover before you ever needed to find this place. But if fate has brought you here, it means I am gone, and someone has betrayed you." Jack stopped reading. His vision blurred. He removed his glasses and wiped away tears with the back of one weathered hand. Atlas quietly rested his head against Jack's knee. Jack smiled weakly. "I know." He took another steadying breath, then continued. "I never wanted to hide this from you. You deserved the truth from the beginning. But I also knew your heart. If I had told you what I discovered about Lauren and Evan before I had proof, you would have forgiven them immediately. You always believed family deserved one more chance." Jack's chest tightened. She knew him perfectly. He turned the page. "I hired investigators after noticing irregular financial activity connected to Evan's development company. At first, I believed he was simply making poor business decisions. I was wrong." Jack read more slowly now. Every word seemed heavier than the last. "He has been committing financial crimes for years." His heartbeat quickened. "I gathered evidence quietly because I feared confronting him too early would place you in danger." Jack swallowed hard, then reached the next paragraph. The words there seemed almost impossible to believe. "I must also tell you something that hurts me more than my illness ever did." Jack froze. His fingers tightened around the paper. He already knew. Whatever came next would change everything. Atlas slowly lifted his head. The old Malinois looked directly into Jack's eyes, as if silently preparing him for the truth that Eleanor had carried alone until her final days. Jack steadied his breathing before lowering his eyes to the letter again. His wife's handwriting remained graceful and steady, every line unmistakably hers. My love, if these words are reaching you, then you have already discovered the sanctuary beneath the barn. I built it because I knew there might come a day when you would have nowhere else to turn. I prayed that day would never arrive. Jack slowly exhaled. Atlas remained pressed against his leg, his warmth grounding Jack as the room seemed to grow quieter around them. I also prayed I would be wrong about Lauren. I wasn't. Jack's fingers tightened around the page. The sentence struck harder than any battlefield memory. He continued reading. Please believe me when I say this was the hardest truth I have ever uncovered. At first I thought our daughter was simply trusting the wrong man. I wanted desperately to believe Evan had manipulated her without her knowledge. Jack closed his eyes for a moment. He wanted to believe exactly the same thing. But Eleanor's next words erased that hope. I watched. I verified. I never accused anyone until every fact could be proven. Lauren knew. Silence settled over the underground chamber. Even the quiet hum of the ventilation system seemed distant. Jack lowered the letter into his lap. His shoulders sagged beneath a grief unlike anything he had known. He could survive gunfire. He could survive losing comrades. He had survived years of PTSD after combat. But accepting that his own daughter had knowingly betrayed him, that was a wound no training had prepared him for. Atlas gently rested his muzzle against Jack's hand. Jack scratched behind the dog's ears without looking up. I know, partner. His voice barely carried. I know. Several minutes passed before Jack found the strength to continue. I discovered Evan's financial fraud nearly 3 years ago, Eleanor had written. It began with irregular property transfers hidden beneath layers of shell companies. Eventually, I found evidence that his luxury developments were built upon borrowed money supported by false valuations. Jack reached for the leather journal resting beside the letter. Inside were neatly organized dates, names, bank records, and handwritten observations. Every page reflected Eleanor's careful mind. Nothing speculative. Everything documented. Paper-clipped behind one entry sat photographs of construction sites. Another section contained copies of corporate filings. Color-coded tabs separated each category. Jack recognized the same methodical organization she had used balancing their family finances for decades. She hadn't simply collected suspicions. She had built a complete investigation. Atlas quietly wandered across the chamber. He paused beside a long metal cabinet before looking back toward Jack. The old seal smiled faintly. You found something else? Atlas tapped the cabinet once with his paw. Jack walked over and opened the heavy doors. Inside stood rows of neatly labeled archive boxes. Each bore the same careful handwriting. Brooks Development Property Records. Bank Correspondence Surveillance Logs. Jack removed the first box. Inside were hundreds of documents. He spread several across Eleanor's desk. Contracts, engineering surveys, emails, maps. Every piece fit together like parts of an enormous puzzle. Then one document immediately caught his attention. A geological survey commissioned 2 years earlier. The title read, Hydrological Assessment, Dead Ridge Valley. Jack frowned. What does water have to do with real estate? He unfolded the oversized survey. Beneath detailed topographic drawings, deep blue markings spread beneath the mountain range surrounding the ranch. The report identified a massive underground spring system extending beneath thousands of acres. Jack's engineering background immediately recognized the significance. Fresh mountain water, naturally filtered, extremely rare. His eyes followed the highlighted boundary until they reached a red circle, exactly where the ranch sat. He read further. Primary access locations. Ullivan property. Jack leaned back slowly. No, he whispered. No wonder. The following pages explained everything. Years earlier, state geologists had quietly confirmed that the underground spring beneath Dead Ridge contained enough clean water to support an entire mountain community. Its flow remained constant through every season. The spring's legal access point existed on only one privately owned parcel. Jack's ranch. His pulse quickened. He reached for another folder. This one contained promotional materials from Evans' company. Luxury mountain resort, 5-star hotels, private lakes, championship golf courses, thousands of vacation homes. Jack stared at the glossy artist renderings. Beautiful, ambitious, impossible. None of it could exist without water. He slowly laid the two documents beside each other. Then everything clicked. The ranch, he whispered. They never wanted the buildings. Atlas looked up immediately. They wanted the spring. Jack hurried through the remaining files. Eleanor had highlighted nearly every important section. The resort's projected value exceeded $1 billion, but every engineering report reached the same conclusion. Without legal access to the Sullivan Spring, construction could never proceed. Transporting water from another source would make the entire project financially impossible. Jack looked toward the ceiling, toward the forgotten barn above them, toward the land everyone had mocked as worthless. His wife hadn't left him a burden. She had left him the single most valuable piece of property in the entire valley, and she had hidden its importance beneath decades of neglect. A laugh escaped him, not from humor, from amazement. Eleanor, you were 10 moves ahead. Atlas suddenly barked once, sharp, focused. He had wandered toward another corner of the chamber where an old maintenance tunnel branched away from the main room. Jack followed. The tunnel led to a narrow concrete passage ending beneath an old stone well. Daylight filtered faintly through the opening high above. Atlas carefully sniffed around the base, then scratched at loose stones lining one wall. Jack knelt beside him. The mortar looked newer than the surrounding rock. He carefully removed several loose stones. Behind them rested a weatherproof metal case. He pulled it free. As he stood, one weakened board covering part of the old well suddenly cracked beneath Atlas's weight. The old Malinois slipped. Jack reacted instantly. Years of combat reflexes returned without thought. He lunged forward, catching Atlas's service harness just before the dog disappeared into the darkness below. For one terrifying second, they both hung suspended over the narrow shaft. Jack planted one boot against the stone wall and pulled with every ounce of strength left in his aging body. Atlas scrambled upward. Moments later, both collapsed safely onto the tunnel floor. Jack wrapped both arms around the dog. You scared me? Atlas licked Jack's cheek once before settling against him. Jack laughed through wet eyes. Guess we're still saving each other. Back in the main chamber, Jack opened the metal case. Inside rested several encrypted flash drives, a satellite phone, and another sealed envelope. Across the front, Eleanor had written, "If you discovered this, then you now know why they wanted the ranch." Jack slowly nodded. I do. He looked once more across the chamber. The vehicles, the evidence, the hidden refuge, the mountain spring. Everything Eleanor had built pointed toward one unavoidable truth. Evan's billion-dollar dream rested entirely upon land he believed was worthless. Land he never truly owned. Land he would eventually come looking for. Jack folded the geological survey carefully and placed it back inside its protective case. Atlas sat beside him, watching the underground entrance with quiet vigilance. Far above them, the Montana wind whispered across the abandoned barn. Neither Jack nor Atlas heard the distant engine climbing Dead Ridge Road. Someone else was already beginning to understand the true value hidden beneath the mountain. Morning arrived beneath a blanket of low gray clouds. Fresh snow covered the roof of the old barn, softening its broken edges until it looked almost peaceful. Smoke drifted lazily from the farmhouse chimney, where Jack had finally managed to light the ancient wood stove. Inside the hidden chamber below, however, sleep had never truly come. Jack sat at Eleanor's desk, surrounded by neatly organized files. A steaming mug of black coffee had long since gone cold. Every page he read deepened his understanding of the trap his wife had seen years before. Atlas rested nearby. Although his eyes appeared closed, one ear remained alert, always listening, always guarding. Jack looked toward the final page Eleanor had marked with a red tab. In her careful handwriting, she had written only one sentence: "Do not confront them until they reveal what they truly need." He read the line twice, then folded the page shut. "You are still teaching me," he whispered, "even after you were gone." Atlas quietly stood, his head turned toward the ceiling. His ears stiffened. Jack noticed immediately. "What is it?" The old Malinois walked toward the stairway leading back to the barn, then stopped. Outside. Engines. Not one. Several. Jack extinguished the desk lamp. Without another word, he and Atlas climbed the staircase. The heavy steel door sealed silently behind them before the disguised barn floor slid back into place. Within minutes, the hidden bunker looked as though it had never existed. Jack scattered a thin layer of loose hay across the repaired floorboards. Atlas watched every movement. Then the dog calmly walked away from the spot. Exactly as though nothing had happened. A lifetime of military deception had taught Jack one truth: the best hiding place was the one that looked ordinary. 3 black SUVs rolled slowly through the ranch gate. Snow crunched beneath oversized tires. Jack stood on the farmhouse porch, one hand wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. His shoulders slumped deliberately. His coat hung loosely. He looked exactly like a grieving old widower who hadn't slept. Atlas lay quietly beside the porch steps, head down, eyes half closed. Only someone who truly knew the dog would recognize the act. The convoy stopped. The driver's door opened first. Evan Brooks stepped into the snow wearing an expensive camel-colored overcoat that looked absurdly clean against the muddy ranch. Lauren climbed out beside him. Dark sunglasses hid her eyes despite the cloudy morning. Behind them emerged 3 large men wearing matching outdoor jackets. Construction workers? No. Jack immediately noticed their posture. Their eyes scanned exits. Their hands remained free. Private security, not laborers. Evan smiled. It never reached his eyes. "Jack." Jack answered quietly. "Morning." No one moved. Snow drifted silently between them. Finally, Evan spoke. "I've been thinking." Jack nodded slowly. "That must have taken some effort." One of the security men smirked. Evan ignored the remark. "I believe we got off on the wrong foot." Jack sipped his coffee. "You threw me out of my own home." Temporary emotions. My wife had been buried that morning. Silence. Lauren shifted uncomfortably. For the first time since arriving, she looked directly at her father. He noticed dark circles beneath her eyes. She looked exhausted, afraid. But she quickly hid it. "Dad, we need to talk." Jack remained where he stood. I'm listening. Evan slowly walked toward the porch. His polished shoes sank into the muddy ground. We've discovered something. Jack said nothing. The old ranch isn't completely worthless after all. Jack almost smiled. Almost. Instead, he lowered his eyes. I figured I'd fix the roof first. Evan chuckled. No. It's about paperwork. What paperwork? The original property deed. Jack blinked slowly. I thought Nathan handled all that. He handled copies. We need the original. Jack shrugged. I don't know where Eleanor kept it. Lauren spoke quickly. Mom always had lockboxes. Not this one. Jack looked genuinely puzzled. I've only been here one night. I haven't found much. Atlas quietly watched every face, especially Evan's. Evan climbed onto the porch until only a few feet separated them. His friendly smile disappeared. I think you know more than you're saying. Jack scratched the gray stubble on his chin. At my age, I forget plenty. One of the security men laughed. Evan didn't. His eyes hardened. We're willing to help you remember. Jack met his gaze. There it was. The real man. Not polished, not charming, hungry, desperate. Exactly as Eleanor had described him. Lauren stepped forward carrying a folder. Dad. She opened it carefully. We've spoken with doctors. Jack's heartbeat slowed. Not from fear. From understanding. The next move had arrived exactly as Eleanor predicted. Lauren continued carefully. You've had combat trauma for years. Jack remained silent. The funeral, the stress, the confusion. She swallowed. We're worried about you. Jack almost admired how convincing she sounded. Almost. Evan produced another document. If someone suffering from severe PTSD begins making irrational financial decisions, the court can appoint temporary guardianship. Jack lowered his coffee cup. You mean a conservatorship? Evan smiled. Exactly. Lauren looked down. We don't want that. Jack studied his daughter. There was hesitation. Small, but real. For a heartbeat, he saw the little girl who once waited at the window every Friday night, hoping her father would come home safely from another deployment. Then Evan spoke again. Unless we have to. The hesitation vanished. Atlas slowly stood. His tail remained low. His ears relaxed. To an untrained observer, he appeared old, harmless. Jack knew differently. Every muscle beneath that aging coat had tightened. Waiting, watching, calculating, exactly as he had done on countless missions. Jack gently touched Atlas's shoulder. Not yet. Evan removed another sheet of paper. If you cooperate, we all move on. What do you need? The original deed. I don't have it. Find it. Jack sighed. I've barely unpacked. You've got 48 hours. Jack looked genuinely confused. For what? To remember. Evan's voice lost every trace of warmth. Because if you don't... He folded the conservatorship paperwork neatly. I'll file this. Jack stared at the documents. Evan leaned closer. The court will appoint medical evaluations. They'll determine you can no longer care for yourself. Lauren remained silent. You'll be transferred to a veteran's psychiatric facility. Jack allowed his shoulders to sag. His breathing became slightly uneven. Years of military training had included more than combat. Sometimes survival depended on convincing the enemy you were weaker than you truly were. He let his eyes lose focus. My memory hasn't been good, Evan noticed immediately. So you admit it? Jack nodded slowly. I forget things. Lauren exchanged a quick glance with her husband. Hope flashed across Evan's face. He believed the act. Jack continued. Eleanor always hid important papers. I can't remember where. He rubbed his forehead. Maybe if I had some time. Evan stepped closer. How much? Jack hesitated deliberately. 2 days. I could search every building. I might remember. Silence. Snow continued falling around them. Finally, Lauren spoke. 48 hours. She looked at Evan. If he finds it, we avoid the court. Evan considered it. His jaw tightened. Then he nodded. Fine. He pointed toward Jack. 48 hours. When we return, you'll hand me the original deed. And if I don't? Evan's expression became ice. Then the judge decides where you spend the rest of your life. The convoy began turning around. Engines rumbled. Doors slammed. Lauren climbed into the SUV without looking back. Only Evan remained for a final moment. He smiled once more. But this time the smile held no warmth. Only warning. You've got 2 days. Then he drove away. Jack remained motionless until the last vehicle disappeared beyond the trees. Only then did he slowly straighten his back. The tired old widower disappeared. The Navy SEAL returned. His shoulders squared. His breathing steadied. His eyes sharpened. Atlas trotted toward him, tail lifting for the first time all morning. Jack smiled. They believed it. Atlas gave a single quiet bark. As Jack bent to scratch beneath the old dog's collar, his fingers brushed against something hidden beneath the faded service harness. He paused. A tiny military-grade recording camera, installed years earlier for training exercises, still rested securely inside a concealed mounting pouch. Its indicator light blinked softly. Jack stared at it, then at the road where Evan's convoy had vanished. A slow smile spread across his face. Every threat, every confession, every word spoken on his porch had just been recorded. Jack carefully unclipped the tiny camera hidden beneath Atlas's retired military harness. The weatherproof device was no larger than a matchbox, its scratched housing bearing the marks of countless training exercises from years ago. He pressed the playback button. Evan's voice drifted through the small speaker. You've got 48 hours. Lauren's quieter voice followed. We've spoken with doctors. Then came Evan's unmistakable threat. The judge decides where you spend the rest of your life. Jack listened to the recording twice, not because he doubted what he had heard, because every sentence confirmed Eleanor's warning. Atlas sat patiently beside him, watching his face instead of the device. Jack scratched the dog's neck. Good work, partner. Atlas leaned gently against his leg. The old soldier looked toward the mountains surrounding Dead Ridge Ranch. 48 hours. That wasn't a deadline anymore. It was an opportunity. Snow continued falling through the afternoon. Inside the hidden underground facility, Jack spread Eleanor's files across the large oak desk. Maps, financial reports, property surveys, corporate records, photographs. Everything had been organized with military precision. He placed the camera recording beside the documents. One piece of evidence among hundreds. But it was the newest, the most personal, the strongest proof yet that Evan's intentions reached far beyond simple greed. Jack reached for the satellite phone Eleanor had left inside the weatherproof case. A yellow sticky note remained attached to its screen. Only when you are ready, beneath it, 3 handwritten names, Nathan Cole, Marcus Reed, Olivia Bennett. Jack smiled faintly. You planned every step. He dialed the first number. Nathan Cole answered on the second ring. Jack? I found what Eleanor wanted me to find. Silence. Then Nathan quietly asked, The ranch? Yes. Another pause. I've been waiting for this call. Jack leaned back in Eleanor's chair. You knew? I knew enough to follow her instructions. Nathan's voice remained calm. She told me never to contact you first. She believed you'd find the truth when the time was right. Jack looked around the underground chamber. It certainly wasn't the truth I expected. Nathan sighed softly. None of us did. Jack explained everything. The hidden bunker, the geological surveys, the recording, the threats. Nathan listened without interrupting. Finally, he spoke. Eleanor prepared legal safeguards years ago. I think it's time you saw all of them. An hour later, headlights appeared beyond the barn. Atlas reached the entrance before Jack even heard the engine. This time the dog wagged his tail, only slightly. Jack climbed the barn stairs. Nathan stepped inside carrying 2 leather briefcases. The attorney looked tired, older than Jack remembered. Yet when he saw the hidden steel hatch beneath the barn floor, his eyes filled with emotion. So, he whispered, you finally found it. Jack extended his hand. Nathan ignored it. Instead, he embraced his old friend. I'm sorry about Eleanor. Jack nodded quietly. So am I. Together they descended into the underground facility. Nathan stopped several times, simply looking around. She never showed me this part. Jack raised an eyebrow. You've been here? Only once. Nathan smiled sadly. She met me outside the barn. She never allowed anyone below. Jack looked around. So I'm the first. Nathan nodded. Exactly as she intended. For nearly 3 hours they reviewed documents. Nathan removed additional folders from his briefcase. Certified property records, court filings, trust documents, insurance policies. Jack quickly realized Eleanor had quietly separated almost every important asset years before her death. She didn't trust Evan. Nathan shook his head. She trusted evidence. He slid another folder across the desk. Eleanor hired independent investigators. Inside lay surveillance photographs showing Evan meeting with unfamiliar businessmen outside expensive hotels, bank statements, wire transfers, luxury purchases that exceeded his reported income. Jack slowly closed the file. She carried this alone. Nathan lowered his eyes. She didn't want you burdened while dealing with PTSD. Jack looked away. His wife had protected him until her final breath. That evening, another vehicle arrived. A rugged black pickup coated with road salt rolled into the yard. Before Jack reached the barn door, a booming voice echoed across the snow. I figured you'd still make me climb mountains. Jack smiled. Marcus. Marcus Reed climbed from the truck with the easy confidence of a man who had spent decades outdoors. His beard had turned almost completely gray, but his broad shoulders remained powerful. He and Jack had served together during multiple deployments. Marcus looked toward Atlas. There he is. The old Malinois immediately recognized him. His tail wagged fully for the first time since Eleanor's funeral. Marcus knelt. You old warhorse? Atlas happily leaned against him. Jack laughed quietly. I was starting to think he liked you more than me. He probably does. Not long afterward, another set of headlights appeared. A silver SUV stopped beside the barn. Olivia Bennett stepped out carrying a hard equipment case. Years earlier, she had worked intelligence analysis supporting special operations overseas. She greeted Jack warmly before glancing toward Atlas. I hear you're still keeping him out of trouble. Jack smiled. It's usually the other way around. By nightfall, the underground chamber had transformed. Maps covered one wall. Documents spread across long tables. Nathan organized legal evidence. Olivia carefully examined Eleanor's encrypted hard drives using secure equipment she had brought. Marcus inspected the ranch from above, studying approaches, tree cover, and vehicle access routes before returning downstairs. No one raised their voice. No one rushed. Every person understood the value of patience. Jack stood quietly watching them. Only yesterday he had believed himself completely alone. Now, trusted friends stood beside him once again. Olivia finally looked up from her laptop. I've decrypted the first drive. Everyone gathered around. The screen displayed folders meticulously labeled by Eleanor. Financial records, correspondence, property rights, surveillance, then future planning. Olivia opened the final folder. Inside rested a single video file, recorded 18 months earlier. Jack hesitated before pressing play. Eleanor appeared on the screen, seated at the very desk where Jack now stood. She smiled gently. If someone watched without knowing she was ill, they might never have guessed. My dear Jack, her voice filled the chamber. If you're seeing this, then my backup plan has become your mission. Jack swallowed hard. She continued. I know you'll blame yourself. Please don't. You could never have prevented what happened. I also know something else. She smiled softly. The moment you stop grieving, the Navy SEAL I married will return. Marcus quietly looked toward Jack. Nathan removed his glasses. Even Olivia blinked away tears. Eleanor continued speaking. You don't need revenge. You need truth. And truth only matters if it's stronger than anger. The screen faded to black. Silence filled the chamber. Jack stood motionless. The words settled deep inside him. Not revenge. Truth. He looked toward Atlas. The old Malinois calmly rested beside the desk, watching Jack exactly as he had after every difficult mission overseas. Jack slowly nodded. She knew. Marcus smiled. She always did. Jack looked across the evidence covering the tables. His grief remained. His PTSD hadn't disappeared. The danger ahead was real. But something inside him had changed. For the first time since Eleanor's funeral, he no longer felt like a broken widower struggling to survive. He felt like a commander preparing carefully for one final mission. And somewhere beneath the quiet confidence growing inside him, he realized Eleanor hadn't merely hidden a bunker. She had anticipated nearly every move Evan Brooks would make years before it happened. Jack stood in silence long after the screen went dark. The underground chamber felt different now. It was no longer simply a hidden refuge beneath an abandoned barn. It was Eleanor's final operation. Every document, every map, every recording, every carefully timed instruction. She had built an invisible shield around the man she loved, knowing she might never live long enough to stand beside him when the attack finally came. Marcus gently folded his arms. She would have made one hell of an intelligence officer. Nathan smiled sadly. She already was. Jack looked down at Atlas. The old Malinois sat quietly at his feet, watching every face in the room. We're running out of time, Jack said. Evan won't wait 48 hours if he realizes the ranch is worth more than he thought. Olivia nodded. I've finished analyzing the encrypted drives. She projected a satellite map onto a portable monitor. The legal evidence is solid. She pointed toward several highlighted routes surrounding Dead Ridge Ranch. But if I were trying to recover hidden property records before investigators noticed, I wouldn't come back through the front gate. Marcus stepped closer. I'd use these. He traced several abandoned logging roads cutting through the national forest. They're old timber routes. Hardly anyone uses them. But they're perfect if someone wants to approach without being seen. Jack studied the map. The western trail passed less than half a mile from the mountain spring Eleanor had marked in red. If Evan sends people, Marcus nodded. That's where they'll come. Jack reached for his coat. Then that's where we're going. The following morning arrived beneath heavy clouds that buried the mountains in fresh snow. Jack and Atlas hiked quietly through towering pines, while Marcus remained near the ranch coordinating with Nathan and Olivia over encrypted radios. The forest was almost completely silent. Only the crunch of snow beneath boots disturbed the stillness. Atlas moved several yards ahead, weaving effortlessly between fallen logs and thick evergreens. Despite his age, he still carried himself like the military working dog he had once been. Every few minutes, he stopped, listened, then continued. Jack smiled. You've still got better hearing than I do. Atlas glanced back briefly before returning to work. The trail eventually climbed toward an abandoned logging road overlooking a narrow valley. Jack crouched behind a cluster of granite boulders. Below them stretched a winding dirt track disappearing into dense forest. Fresh tire marks. Marcus had been right. Someone had used the road recently. Jack photographed the tracks before transmitting the images to Olivia. They're new, she replied through his earpiece. Within 12 hours. Jack nodded. So they're already searching. They spent nearly an hour examining the area. Atlas suddenly stopped. His ears lifted. The old Malinois inhaled deeply, then turned sharply toward a stand of young pine trees. Jack immediately recognized the behavior. Detection. Not curiosity. He quietly knelt beside Atlas. What is it? The dog remained perfectly still, watching, listening. Then, the faint metallic click of a vehicle door closing somewhere beyond the trees. Jack slowly lowered himself behind a fallen log. 3 figures emerged through the forest. Winter camouflage, dark jackets, heavy boots. Not hunters, not hikers. Each carried backpacks and moved with practiced coordination. Jack watched through binoculars. One of the men unfolded a survey map. Another pointed directly toward Dead Ridge Ranch. The third spoke quietly into a handheld radio. Jack activated the camera on his phone and recorded everything. The men remained too far away to identify clearly. But one thing became obvious. They weren't sightseeing, they were searching. Jack waited until they disappeared farther down the trail before whispering into his radio. Marcus, I'm here. We've got company. How many? 3. Marcus answered immediately. Stay hidden. We'll call the sheriff. Jack hesitated. They'll be gone before anyone arrives. A brief silence followed. Then Marcus sighed. Don't play hero. Jack smiled faintly. I retired years ago. Atlas looked back toward the trail. The dog suddenly stiffened. Every muscle locked. Jack knew that posture. Someone else. Closer. Much closer. He slowly turned. Nothing. Only snow, wind, pines. Then, a twig snapped behind him. Jack spun. A 4th man burst from the trees only 20 feet away. The stranger wore a dark ski mask and heavy winter clothing. Startled, he froze for a split second after realizing Jack wasn't alone. Then he reached beneath his jacket. Jack immediately raised both hands. We don't want trouble. The man hesitated, then turned and ran. Jack remained where he was. He had no intention of chasing anyone through unfamiliar terrain, but Atlas had already launched forward. Atlas! The command echoed through the forest. The dog stopped instantly. Military discipline overrode instinct. He circled back toward Jack. When another sound shattered the silence, A single gunshot cracked across the valley. Jack's combat instincts exploded awake. Down! Atlas reacted instantly. Instead of dropping behind cover, the old Malinois threw himself directly toward Jack. The impact knocked Jack sideways behind the fallen log. A second shot struck the tree above them, spraying bark across the snow. Then Jack heard it, a sharp cry unlike anything Atlas had ever made before. The dog stumbled. His front leg collapsed beneath him. Bright crimson spread across the white snow. "No," Jack whispered. "No." The shooter disappeared into the forest almost immediately, fleeing through dense trees before Jack could identify him. Jack ignored everything else. He dropped beside Atlas. The old Malinois struggled to stand. Jack gently held him still. "It's okay. It's okay." His hands quickly found the wound, high on the shoulder. Blood flowed steadily, but not violently. Years of battlefield medicine returned instantly. Jack removed his scarf and pressed firm pressure against the injury. Atlas never growled, never panicked. He simply looked into Jack's eyes, trusting him completely. Jack's own vision blurred. "You've done your job, you hear me? You've done enough." Marcus's voice crackled urgently through the radio. "Jack!" Jack answered without taking his eyes off Atlas. "He got hit." "I'm coming." "No." Jack's voice became calm, controlled. The nearest road's closer. He carefully lifted Atlas into his arms. The old dog weighed less than he once had, but every step still demanded every ounce of Jack's strength. Snow continued falling. The forest seemed endless. Jack never stopped talking. "You remember Afghanistan?" Atlas blinked slowly. "You carried me then. My turn now." The old Malinois rested his head against Jack's shoulder. Jack reached the pickup nearly 20 minutes later. He laid Atlas gently across the back seat, wrapped him in every blanket he could find, and started the engine. The tires spun briefly before gripping the icy road. The truck surged forward. Ahead lay nearly 40 miles of winding mountain highway. Beyond that, a small rural veterinary clinic. Jack drove faster than he had in years. Every few seconds he looked toward the back seat. Atlas remained awake, watching him, guarding him, even now. As snow covered the windshield and the mountains disappeared into the approaching storm, Jack realized something that tightened his chest more painfully than grief ever had. His oldest friend had once again stepped between him and danger without hesitation. And this time, the cost had been paid in blood. Jack kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting gently on Atlas's side, feeling the slow rise and fall of the old Malinois' breathing. The mountain highway disappeared beneath swirling snow. Visibility shrank to only a few yards. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the storm. "Stay with me, partner," Jack whispered. "You've survived worse than this." Atlas's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. That tiny movement was enough to keep Jack's hope alive. The lights of the small veterinary clinic finally appeared through the snow like a lighthouse in the darkness. Jack carried Atlas through the front doors before anyone could reach them. "I need help." The urgency in his voice erased every question. Within seconds, Dr. Emily Carter and 2 technicians rushed forward with a rolling stretcher. "What happened?" "Gunshot." The veterinarian's expression sharpened immediately. "We're taking him now." Jack carefully lowered Atlas onto the stretcher. The old dog tried to lift his head. His eyes never left Jack. "You stay with us," Jack said quietly. "I'll be right here." The treatment room doors closed. Silence settled over the waiting room. For the first time since Eleanor's funeral, Jack allowed himself to shake. His hands trembled uncontrollably, not from cold, from helplessness. Combat had taught him how to stop bleeding, how to survive explosions, how to carry wounded teammates. But waiting had always been the hardest battle. Marcus arrived less than 30 minutes later. He placed a hot cup of coffee beside Jack without saying a word. Nathan followed soon after. Then Olivia. The four friends sat together beneath the quiet hum of fluorescent lights. No one spoke for several minutes. Finally, Olivia broke the silence. The sheriff recovered tire impressions. Jack looked up. They match a vehicle registered through one of Evan's construction subcontractors. Marcus nodded grimly. He isn't searching anymore. He's hunting. Nathan opened a leather folder. I've contacted federal investigators. Jack frowned. I thought they needed more evidence. They did. Nathan gently placed the porch recording behind Eleanor's financial files. Not anymore. Nearly 2 hours later, the treatment room door opened. Dr. Carter stepped into the hallway. Everyone stood. The bullet passed through the shoulder. Jack held his breath. It missed the major artery. Relief washed across every face. He lost blood. He's exhausted. But, she smiled warmly, I think he's going to recover. Jack closed his eyes. For one brief moment, the crushing weight he'd carried since the forest lifted. Can I see him? Of course. Atlas lay beneath warm blankets. His shoulder was heavily bandaged. An IV line delivered fluids through one front leg. Machines quietly monitored his heartbeat. When Jack entered, Atlas slowly opened his eyes. His tail gave one gentle thump against the blanket. Jack laughed softly through tears. You stubborn old soldier. He carefully rested his forehead against Atlas's. You saved me again. Atlas answered by placing one tired paw across Jack's hand. No words were needed. Their bond had always existed beyond language. The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds. Fresh snow sparkled across the Montana mountains. Atlas wasn't strong enough to leave yet, but Dr. Carter had encouraging news. He'll need time. He'll always carry the scar. But I believe he'll walk beside you again. Jack smiled. That's all either of us needs. Before leaving, he carefully removed Atlas's old military harness. The small recording camera still rested beneath it. Dr. Carter looked at the worn equipment. He was wearing this yesterday? Jack nodded. It never left him after retirement. She gently smiled. Some partners never stop working. 3 days later, the storm had passed. Atlas stepped carefully from the clinic, using only 3 strong legs while favoring the injured shoulder. Jack immediately crouched beside him. You don't have to prove anything. Atlas looked toward the waiting truck, then calmly climbed inside by himself. Marcus laughed. I've met operators with less determination. Back at Dead Ridge Ranch, the atmosphere inside the underground facility had changed. Maps covered nearly every wall. Large monitors displayed aerial photographs. Nathan had transformed Eleanor's planning room into a legal command center. Olivia projected satellite images beside geological surveys. Marcus coordinated secure communications. Jack entered carrying Atlas's leash. The old Malinois immediately limped toward Eleanor's desk, then stopped. His nose lifted. He turned, slowly, toward a locked metal cabinet no one had opened before. Jack noticed immediately. What is it? Atlas sniffed again, then gently nudged the cabinet door. Marcus frowned. I thought we searched everything. Nathan checked the inventory list. Apparently not. Jack unlocked the cabinet. Inside sat only one weatherproof document tube. Nothing else. He carefully removed it. Eleanor's handwriting covered the lid. Open only when the investors arrive. Jack looked around the room. She even planned the timing. Nathan carefully opened the tube. Inside rested original survey certifications, state water right approvals, federal geological confirmations. Every document carried official seals. None had ever been filed publicly. Olivia's eyes widened. These aren't copies. They're originals. Nathan smiled slowly. Which means no one can dispute ownership. Jack rolled the documents across the table. The room fell silent. Marcus finally spoke. So when's the presentation? Nathan checked his notes. Tomorrow. The investors arrive at Big Sky Mountain Resort at 1 o'clock. Jack looked toward Atlas. The old Malinois remained beside the desk, watching quietly despite the fresh bandage wrapped around his shoulder. No, Jack said gently. You're staying here. Atlas immediately stood, ignoring the pain, ignoring the injury. He limped toward the exit. Marcus chuckled. I don't think he agrees. Dr. Carter's instructions echoed in Jack's mind. No unnecessary strain, several weeks of rest. But Atlas simply sat beside the truck door, waiting. Exactly as he had before every deployment. Jack sighed. I should have known. He knelt beside the old dog. This isn't another mission. Atlas rested his head against Jack's chest. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Jack quietly smiled. I guess we've never really believed that. The following afternoon, sunlight reflected brilliantly from the snow-covered peaks surrounding Big Sky. Luxury vehicles lined the entrance to the mountain resort. Television crews assembled outside. Business leaders, investors, state officials, everyone had gathered to celebrate Evan Brooks's billion-dollar wilderness development. Inside the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers shimmered above polished hardwood floors. Massive windows overlooked endless white mountains. Champagne glasses sparkled beneath golden light. At the center of the room stood an elaborate scale model of Evan's future resort city. Artificial lakes, luxury cabins, private ski villages, everything looked perfect. Evan stood confidently before the assembled guests wearing an immaculate tailored navy suit. Lauren remained beside him in an elegant winter white dress. Neither noticed that several unfamiliar guests had quietly entered the ballroom. Nathan adjusted his tie. Marcus blended naturally among the crowd. Olivia observed from the rear of the room carrying a small portfolio. Federal investigators waited discreetly elsewhere inside the resort. And outside. A dark pickup quietly rolled beneath the porte-cochere. Jack stepped out first. His charcoal suit fit perfectly. Snowflakes settled across his shoulders before melting away. Then he opened the passenger door. Atlas carefully climbed down. His shoulder remained bandaged beneath a specially modified service harness. He walked with a slight limp. But every step carried quiet dignity. Hotel guests paused to watch. Many expected a broken, homeless veteran. Instead, they saw a former Navy SEAL standing tall beside the loyal partner who had nearly given his life protecting him. The ballroom doors slowly opened. Conversation faded. Music softened. Every eye turned toward the entrance. Jack placed one calm hand on Atlas's shoulder. Ready, partner? Atlas looked up. Then together, they walked into the room where every lie was about to collapse. The conversations inside the grand ballroom faded one by one. Crystal glasses stopped halfway to waiting lips. The string quartet continued playing for only a few uncertain seconds before the musicians themselves noticed every eye turning toward the entrance. Jack Sullivan walked calmly across the polished floor. His charcoal suit was immaculate. His posture carried the quiet confidence of a man who had already survived every battle that truly mattered. Beside him, Atlas matched his pace. The old military K9 walked with a slight limp, the white bandage beneath his modified harness visible with every step. His scar had not diminished him. It had become part of his honor. Whispers spread across the room. Isn't that... I thought he... That's the veteran. Lauren slowly turned. The color drained from her face. Her champagne glass slipped from trembling fingers and shattered against the marble floor. Evan froze beside the presentation model. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Jack stopped only a few feet from the investor's table. He looked first at Lauren, then at Evan. Finally, he addressed the room. "Good afternoon." His voice was calm, measured. "I apologize for interrupting your celebration. I won't take much of your time." The lead investor, a silver-haired businessman from Denver, studied Jack with quiet curiosity. "And you are?" "My name is Jack Sullivan. I am the legal owner of the property upon which this entire development depends." The ballroom grew perfectly silent. Evan recovered first. He forced a laugh. "I'm afraid there's been some misunderstanding." Jack simply smiled. "No. The misunderstanding is yours." Nathan stepped forward carrying Eleanor's original legal documents. Olivia quietly connected a laptop to the ballroom projector. Marcus positioned himself near the side entrance. Everything happened so naturally that most guests barely noticed. The massive screen behind the stage flickered to life. Instead of architectural renderings, official geological surveys appeared. Highlighted in brilliant blue was the underground mountain spring beneath Dead Ridge Ranch. Jack continued speaking. "This development requires one essential resource: water." He pointed toward the survey. "This protected spring supplies the only privately controlled source capable of supporting the proposed resort." The investors leaned forward. Jack looked directly at Evan. "My late wife discovered this years ago. She secured the rights legally. They belong to our family trust." Nathan raised the certified documents. "The ownership has been verified, recorded, and protected." One investor frowned. "You mean this project cannot proceed without your approval?" Jack answered honestly. "That's exactly what it means." A low murmur rolled across the ballroom. Evan quickly stepped toward the microphone. "These claims are completely false." "My legal team," Olivia interrupted quietly. "Perhaps your legal team would like to explain these." The screen changed. Bank transfers, corporate records, forged signatures, emails. Each document carried official timestamps. Nathan calmly addressed the audience. "These records have already been provided to the appropriate authorities. Their authenticity has been verified." Lauren stared at the screen in horror. She recognized the signatures. She recognized the emails. She remembered helping Evan explain them away months earlier. Only now, there was nowhere left to hide. Evan's confident smile disappeared. He stepped toward Jack. "You planned this?" Jack shook his head. "No. My wife did. I simply chose to trust her." Atlas suddenly stopped walking. His ears lifted. His nose pointed directly toward Evan's leather briefcase resting beside the presentation table. Jack noticed immediately. So did Marcus. So did Olivia. Atlas limped forward. He stopped beside the briefcase, then sat. Without barking, without growling, simply waiting. Jack recognized the behavior instantly. Military detection, the same signal Atlas had used overseas when locating hidden explosives or critical evidence. Jack looked toward Evan. "Would you mind opening your briefcase?" Evan hesitated. "It contains confidential business documents." Nathan smiled politely. "Exactly." The hesitation lasted only a second, but it was enough. Two federal investigators stepped quietly through the ballroom doors. Neither displayed weapons. Both wore dark business suits. One spoke calmly. "Mr. Brooks, we'll open it." The room fell silent again. Evan took one step backward. The investigator placed the briefcase on the table. He opened the latches. Inside rested neatly organized folders, contracts, property maps, financial agreements. Then, beneath a false divider, another envelope. The investigator removed it carefully. Nathan's expression hardened. "Those," he said quietly, "are the original forged property transfers." Lauren covered her mouth. "They're still here." Evan lunged instinctively toward the table. "I can explain." "No," the investigator answered. "I don't believe you can." Atlas remained seated, watching, waiting, exactly as he had been trained years ago. The lead investor slowly removed his reading glasses. He studied the recovered documents, then looked directly at Evan. "You asked us to invest nearly $2 billion, based on property you never legally controlled." Evan said nothing. Another investor quietly stood, then another. One after another, they gathered their portfolios. The room that had welcomed Evan only minutes earlier now turned its back on him. Lauren's breathing became uneven. She looked around desperately. Every familiar face avoided her eyes. Every handshake she had enjoyed that afternoon disappeared. The elegant ballroom suddenly felt impossibly large. Federal investigators stepped forward once more. "Mr. Brooks, we have warrants relating to financial fraud, document forgery, and additional offenses currently under investigation." "This isn't necessary," Evan whispered. "I'm willing to cooperate." "We're glad to hear that." The handcuffs closed with a sharp metallic click. No one spoke. No one applauded. The silence carried far greater weight. Lauren watched as Evan was escorted across the ballroom. He never looked back. The massive doors closed behind him. For a long moment, only the sound of the wind outside remained. Then Lauren collapsed into the nearest chair. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. Her phone vibrated. Once, twice, again. She looked at the screen. Her face lost every remaining trace of color. She opened the first notification. "Mortgage lender has initiated immediate foreclosure proceedings." The second. "Personal accounts temporarily frozen pending investigation." The third. "Property access suspended." Her breathing became ragged. "My house," she whispered. "My home." She looked toward Jack. For the first time since Eleanor's funeral, there was no arrogance, no anger, only fear. She slowly crossed the ballroom. Every step seemed heavier than the last. When she reached her father, she fell to her knees. "I'm sorry." Her voice cracked. "I thought—" She stopped. Tears blurred her vision. "I thought if I kept saying yes, everything would somehow work out." Jack remained silent. "I ignored Mom." Lauren continued through quiet sobs. "I ignored you. I ignored every warning because I wanted the life Evan promised." She looked down. "I traded my family for a fantasy." Atlas slowly walked toward her. Despite the pain in his shoulder, he stopped only a few feet away. He neither barked nor retreated. He simply watched. Jack knelt until he was level with his daughter. He saw not the woman who had thrown him into the rain, but the frightened child who had once waited for him to return safely from deployments. His voice remained gentle. "I forgive you." Lauren looked up hopefully. Jack continued. "But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It gives you the chance to face them honestly." She began crying harder. Jack rested one hand gently on her shoulder. "You'll have to rebuild. The right way. Just like I have." Lauren nodded slowly. She finally understood. There would be no shortcuts, no rescue, no inheritance large enough to repair the choices she had made. Healing would begin only after accepting responsibility. As the remaining guests quietly left the ballroom, Nathan approached carrying a single sealed envelope. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. Across the front, in Eleanor's familiar handwriting, were 5 simple words. For Jack. Read this last. Jack stared at the envelope. He had believed he had already uncovered every secret Eleanor had left behind. Apparently, she had saved one final gift for the very end. The ballroom had nearly emptied by the time Jack stepped onto the quiet terrace overlooking the snow-covered mountains. The celebration that had begun with champagne and applause had dissolved into silence. Only the wind remained. Atlas settled carefully beside a stone fireplace built into the terrace wall. His injured shoulder was healing, but every movement reminded Jack how close he had come to losing the partner who had stood beside him through war, grief, and betrayal. Nathan quietly handed him the sealed envelope. "I think she'd want you to read it alone." Jack nodded. Marcus rested a hand on his shoulder. Olivia offered a gentle smile. Then the 3 friends stepped away, giving him the privacy Eleanor had carefully planned one last time. Jack broke the seal. Inside rested a single handwritten letter. The paper carried the familiar scent of cedar that Eleanor always kept in her desk. He smiled before reading the first line. "My dearest Jack, if this letter has reached your hands, then you already know the truth. You survived the storm. Atlas stayed beside you, just as I always knew he would." Jack paused. He looked toward the old Malinois. Atlas rested quietly in the snow, watching the mountains. Jack continued reading. "If you are reading this, please promise me one thing. Do not let the victory become your destination. Justice is important, but it is never the finish line. Healing is." His eyes blurred. The words sounded exactly like Eleanor. Steady, patient, always looking farther ahead than anyone else. "I bought the ranch because I believed one day it could become more than land. I believed it could become a refuge for people who returned home carrying battles no one else could see." Jack's hands trembled slightly. "I watched you fight PTSD every single night. I watched Atlas wake you from nightmares before they consumed you. Together you taught me something extraordinary. Sometimes healing doesn't begin with medicine. Sometimes it begins when someone simply refuses to leave your side." Jack slowly lowered the letter. Atlas lifted his head. Their eyes met. The old dog slowly walked over and rested against Jack's leg. Jack smiled through tears. "You never left." Atlas answered with one gentle nudge beneath Jack's hand. Jack looked back to the letter. "Promise me the ranch will never become another monument to money. Let it become a place where veterans and working dogs find each other again. Let broken people discover they are not broken beyond repair. Build something that outlives all of us." The letter ended simply. "I have loved you every day of my life. Finish the mission. Always yours." Jack folded the letter with the same care he had once used folding the American flag after military ceremonies. He looked across the endless Montana mountains. For the first time since Eleanor's funeral, he knew exactly what came next. 6 months later, spring arrived in the Flathead Valley. Snowmelt rushed through mountain streams. Wildflowers covered hillsides that had seemed lifeless only months before. The abandoned ranch had changed almost beyond recognition. The broken fence had been rebuilt. The farmhouse windows reflected morning sunlight instead of years of neglect. The weathered barn remained standing exactly where it had always been, preserving the secret hidden beneath it. Only now, it protected something entirely different. A hand-carved wooden sign stood beside the entrance road. Atlas Ridge Veterans Retreat, Recovery Through Service. Pickup trucks filled the parking area. Some belonged to former Marines, others to Army Rangers, Air Force veterans, Navy corpsmen, Coast Guard rescue swimmers. Men and women from every branch arrived carrying invisible burdens remarkably similar to Jack's. Many came quietly. Most expected another counseling center. Instead, they found open skies, mountain trails, fresh air, purpose, and dogs. Rescued German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, Labradors, working breeds abandoned after difficult lives, each carefully matched with veterans beginning difficult journeys of their own. Jack watched from the porch as one young Marine veteran hesitated beside a nervous rescue dog that refused to approach anyone. Neither trusted easily. Neither knew quite how to begin. Jack smiled. "I've seen this before." Atlas slowly walked toward them. His gray muzzle and permanent shoulder scar immediately drew the younger dog's attention. Without a sound, Atlas simply sat. Patient. Calm. The rescue dog cautiously stepped closer, then closer still. Finally, the Marine knelt. The frightened dog rested its head against his knee. The young veteran closed his eyes. For several long seconds, neither moved. Jack quietly looked toward Eleanor's photograph hanging beside the porch door. "You were right. The underground facility also found new purpose. The collector cars remained carefully preserved, providing financial security for the retreat. The communications room became a classroom where veterans learned new careers. The planning room transformed into a resource center, connecting former service members with employment, housing, and counseling. Nathan volunteered legal assistance. Olivia taught technology and cybersecurity. Marcus led wilderness leadership courses through the surrounding mountains. Every person who entered the ranch left something behind. Fear, isolation, hopelessness, and each carried something new home. Connection, purpose, hope. Lauren arrived quietly one autumn afternoon. She drove an aging pickup instead of a luxury SUV. She wore simple clothes, no jewelry, no designer handbag. She looked older, not because of time, because of experience. Jack met her near the front gate. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, Lauren looked around the ranch. "It's beautiful." Jack nodded. "It belongs to a lot of people now." She smiled sadly. "I've been volunteering at a community kitchen." Jack listened. "I wanted to learn how to help instead of taking." Jack placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm proud of that." Lauren's eyes filled with tears. "I don't expect things to ever be the way they were. They can't." Jack answered honestly. "But families don't heal by pretending nothing happened. They heal one honest day at a time." She nodded. For the first time in many years, father and daughter embraced. Not because everything had been repaired, but because both had finally chosen truth over pride. Late one evening, after everyone had gone inside, Jack walked alone toward the hill overlooking the ranch. Atlas followed beside him. The old Malinois moved slower now. Age had finally begun winning battles that courage never lost. Jack sat on a weathered wooden bench facing the mountains. The sunset painted the peaks in shades of gold and crimson. Atlas carefully climbed beside him. He rested his head against Jack's hand. Exactly as he had done after countless missions, Jack gently stroked the old dog's ears. "You know, I spent months believing I'd lost everything." Atlas looked toward the horizon. Jack smiled. "The mansion wasn't my inheritance. The money wasn't my inheritance." He looked across the retreat where lights glowed warmly from the renovated farmhouse. Veterans laughed around an evening campfire. Dogs rested peacefully at their feet. Somewhere a guitar played softly beneath the stars. Jack took a slow breath. "This," he whispered. This was. The wind carried the scent of pine across the valley. Somewhere above them, an eagle drifted silently over the mountains. Jack closed his eyes. The nightmares still visited sometimes. PTSD had not magically disappeared. Loss still hurt. Scars still remained. But now, when darkness came, it no longer arrived alone. Atlas leaned a little closer. Jack smiled. Mission accomplished, partner. The old Malinois gave one slow wag of his tail before settling comfortably beside the man he had protected for a lifetime. Together they watched the last light disappear beyond the Montana mountains. Not as a homeless veteran and his aging dog, but as two loyal warriors whose greatest victory had never been winning a battle. It had been giving others a reason to keep fighting. If you believe loyalty and integrity will always outlast greed, type yes in the comments and let us know what state you're watching from. Every story like this reminds us that real strength isn't measured by what we own, but by the people and values we refuse to abandon. If stories of justice, dignity, faithful canines, and second chances speak to your heart, subscribe and join us for the next journey across the mountains, ranches, and small towns of America.